For quite some time, Donald Trump has wanted to brand Antifa as a terrorist organization, only he can't really do that because it's kind of a loose-knit ideology with various cells. Now, the individual cells themselves can perhaps be named as domestic terror organizations, but typically law enforcement is reticent to do this because of free speech issues. However, a couple months ago, the DHS did start looking at Antifa violence as acts of domestic terrorism. Bill Barr recently clarified this, saying that they investigate the actions and the crimes taken by Antifa as acts of terror, but they're not labeling the group as such. But now we're learning through leaked documents, the Department of Homeland Security is investigating alleged Antifa protesters as terrorists trained in Syria. And this is kind of obvious to anybody who's read any news for quite some time, because there literally are photographs of American citizens in Syria flying the Antifa flag. Now, one of the reasons they can't necessarily declare Antifa a domestic terror organization is because there's no such declaration for groups. But if Antifa was secretly being funded or trained, or certain groups were, by international sources, well, now you've got international terrorism. And let's just make one thing clear. For one, when something is illegal, I'm not a big fan of adding things to it, like hate crime laws or terror laws. Terrorism is typically defined as essentially breaking the law, threatening someone for some kind of political or social goal. But if they're already breaking the law, let's just get them on, how they're breaking the law. But when it comes to international efforts, then we've got actions taken to try and seriously harm our country, in which case you could theoretically even argue treason. Individuals in this country taking up arms against it alongside an adversary. Now, I'm not saying the people that are doing the trainings in Syria or the people who are being trained are doing it because they're trying to destroy this country. Typically, they were fighting ISIS and other groups. But if they come back and they use these tactics, subversion tactics, propaganda tactics, military tactics here in this country against this country and law enforcement, sounds like we got a case of domestic terrorism, and perhaps with international ties, you could then declare Antifa to be terrorists. Now, we are looking at the 68th night, last night, of violence in Portland. And sure enough, the media seems to be on the side of Antifa. Hey, that's just how it's been. Not every single person in media, not every single outlet, but for the most part, mainstream news organizations defend Antifa with false arguments. Notably, Newsweek does it in this article, saying, but what about the far right? Sure, they're bad too. Doesn't change the fact that Antifa is engaging in terror, especially if they're being trained in Syria. So we've got some breaking news about what's going on in Portland, because yes, the violence has not stopped, even though they're trying to push this fake narrative that once the DHS stood down, it was all calm. Key word though, they say relatively. Yes, it's not as crazy as it has been, but it's still really violent. And just the other night, apparently, some Antifa women got stabbed in the chest. Okay, so I wouldn't consider that to be peaceful action. People are clashing in the streets. And perhaps without police, these far leftists are actually less safe. Earlier today, I did a segment about people who tried to go to the Seattle police chief's home, and armed locals came out and chased them off. Now you see in Portland, when the police are standing down near the courthouse, the protesters themselves are getting hurt. So some people have said that these far leftists don't realize when they come out, the police are there to varying degrees for their protection, because there are angry people on the other side who would theoretically engage in more dangerous behavior against them, because it's now going on to night 69 of the riots. That would be tonight. We'll see how that plays out. But let's read the news and see what's going on with this investigation into Antifa as terrorists trained in Syria. Before we get started, head over to timcast.com/donate if you'd like to support my work. There's many ways you can give. There's a P.O. box if you'd like to send things. But the best thing you can do, share this video. Or actually just subscribe, but either really helps. About half of the people who watch my channel, watch my videos, aren't subscribed to this channel. So if you want to get more, then subscribe. But sharing really does help, because, it spreads the word and helps the channel grow in that way. But let's read the news first from Newsweek. And mind you, this story is quite biased. They say, DHS investigates alleged Antifa protesters as terrorists trained in Syria. An intelligence report from the Department of Homeland Security states that anti-fascist activists, Antifa, are being investigated as possible terrorists with affiliations to Syria, even though no self-identified members of the loosely affiliated Antifa protest movement have either been proven to commit any murders or carry out any terrorist attacks. Now, what's funny about this is they're currently being investigated as such by the DHS, as far as I can tell. I'm sorry, by the DOJ, not DHS. DOJ to treat Antifa involvement in protests as domestic terrorism from Axios May 31st. So maybe we haven't yet seen those convictions, but I think it's stupid to say that you can't look at someone throwing a Molotov at someone else and screaming some political ideology and say that doesn't fit the mold. And it's also really dumb to say simply because they're not successful that they don't get to be deemed terrorists. They haven't killed anybody. So they're still bad and they're still engaging in terrorism. In fact, I would argue it's more insidious, more nefarious. What Antifa does is they use low-tier tactics to make sure you're scared, but not to draw enough attention to themselves. Dum-dums in media then come out and say, but they never killed anybody. Well, yeah, sure. I mean, there was that one guy in Dayton who posted a bunch of pro-Antifa messages, but we don't know what his motivation was in the actual attack he carried out. But so what? It's not a requirement to literally kill people. It's just that you engage in violence for political reasons. The July 14th report, entitled The Syrian Conflict and Its Nexus to the U.S.-Based Anti-Fascist Movement, states, Antifa is being analyzed under the 2019 DHS Strategic Framework for Countering Terrorism and Targeted Violence, according to a copy of the document obtained by the progressive political magazine The Nation. It received a copy from someone who previously worked on DHS intelligence. I'm going to stop you right there and just point out there's no need for some special report on this. I've got the proof, and it's actually really easy. It's just this article from NPR back in 2018. Here we can see dozens of Westerners join Kurds to fight ISIS in Syria, and they are flying the anti-fascist action flag. Now, you can say that fighting against ISIS is noble or whatever, but listen, that's not the point. The point is, if a group of people in a foreign country flying the Antifa flag are engaging in activities, these people come to the U.S. with this training and are engaging in activities that are considered to be domestic terror, but they have international training and are tied to other groups internationally, well, now we're dealing with overt international terror groups. Perhaps then Antifa could be dubbed terrorism. Now, let me just clarify, though. It's not about Antifa, that one word. It's about the specific Antifa cells that have members, have founders, have leadership, and I'm going to show you their own words to prove it. I bring receipts. A lot of people try saying Antifa's not even a group. It simply means anti-fascist. That's not true. It's a clever semantic game so that anybody who opposes violent, terroristic authoritarianism, they say, well, then you must be fascists. No. Opposing your psychotic behavior does not make me a fascist. You are closer to fascist than anybody else. Now, I get it. Antifa are not fascist. That's another important distinction people don't get. Fascism has ties to nationalism. They're not. They're total open borders types. And it has to do with ultra-traditionalism. They're ultra-progressive. They're authoritarian communists. You see, there's a difference, and they're both really bad. Really bad. The report details more than half a dozen people identified with various far-left causes who have personally visited Syria to fight alongside Kurdish factions. The factions include the YPG, the People's Defense Unit, the PKK, the Kurdistan Workers' Party, and the Peshmerga, military forces that provide security for Iraq's autonomous Kurdistan region. None of these organizations are currently listed by the U.S. as terrorist groups. But here's the important point. Antifa is being investigated. These individuals are investigated for domestic terror, and they're being trained by people who fly that flag as well. Well, there you go. There appears to be a clear connection between Antifa ideology and Kurdish democratic federalism teachings and ideology, the report stated. U.S. Customs and Border Protection concern about an interest in these individuals stems from the types of skills and motivations that may have developed during their time overseas, engaged in foreign conflicts. Mind you, one of those tactics will be the manipulation of the public, press relations, and propaganda. That's why Antifa knows better. That's why in Portland, what they do is they hand out explosives to other people so you can't catch the people inciting the violence. And that happened to some guy, what was his name? Gabriel Agard Berryhill. Some dumb young 18-year-old was handed an explosive, so he says, and he threw it. And they don't know who actually gave it to him, but this is a common tactic from Antifa. They say, while the report said that Antifa and the Kurdish factions share some Marxist, socialist, communist, and anti-fascist ideologies that are sometimes far left and utopian, the report also concluded that, apart from a single instance derived from open source reporting, there's no evidence of centralized foreign efforts to command Antifa-affiliated U.S. citizens once they return to the U.S. after fighting abroad. One person named in the report, Bruce Belden, said, "I am not now, nor have I ever been a member of any Antifa organization." Stephen Aftergood, director of the Federation of American Scientists Project on Government Secrecy, told The Nation that he fears that by labeling Antifa as a foreign-supported terrorist organization, the federal government may be making it easy to subject protesters affiliated with the movement to warrantless searches and surveillance that would otherwise be illegal and unconstitutional against U.S. citizens. Okay, I am not a fan of creeping authoritarian power or executive authority, but I would simply just ask these people not to fly abroad and join in military combat with Marxist, far leftist, anti-fascist, Antifa specifically groups, come back to the U.S. and use those tactics against this country. In which case, you will expect to see law enforcement come after you if you're trying to subvert the democratic systems in our own nation. They mention, on July 27th, President Donald Trump said that he wanted to declare Antifa as a terrorist organization. But mind you, this is back in 2019. And the story we're seeing now, very obviously, is from just today. I think Newsweek got their dates wrong, but sure. They say a terror attack, according to the Patriot Act, is dangerous to human life, violation of criminal laws, seeks to intimidate or coerce a civilian population. Here's what they end up saying. The autonomous groups that make up the Antifa movement generally oppose neo-Nazis, fascism, white supremacists, racism, and other types of extreme right-wing ideology. While some Antifa members have engaged in vandalism and physical violence, they have not yet been linked to any killings in the U.S., according to the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Other known hate groups that have committed murders in the 21st century haven't been designated as terrorist organizations by the United States either, because they don't designate anyone domestic terror organizations. But if they are getting, I'll tell you what, like, it's really, really simple. Any far right group that is getting support internationally, slap that label on them, foreign supported terror organization. The same is true for Antifa. But Antifa knows better than to engage in extremist tactics, but they do, and they have. A man went to an ICE facility with a ghost rifle and firebombs and attacked it. He fired at people. Fortunately for us, this guy was unsuccessful. But now the media gets to run wild saying, see, they've never killed anybody. Yeah, but not for lack of trying. They certainly are trying. They have tried several times, and they use different tactics, like giving weapons to other people so they can say, wasn't us. But there are branded cells with founders and members. Some of these groups you can actually join, so long as you're friends with some of these individuals. Now, I'll just point out again, back on May 31st, they say Attorney General Bill Barr said in a statement Sunday that the Justice Department will use its network of 56 regional FBI joint terrorism task forces to identify the criminal organizers and instigators of violence during the George Floyd protests, including Antifa and similar groups. Barr, President Trump, and other members of the administration have pinned the blame for riots and looting over the past few days of protests against police brutality on Antifa, a loosely defined far-left movement that uses violence and direct action protest tactics. But I'm going to keep this one specific. I'm going to show you a specific organization. But first, I want to talk about the latest news. Cruz, ahead of Antifa hearing, describes riots in U.S. cities as organized terror attacks. These violent riots are not spontaneous, nor are they mere coincidences, Cruz says. But by the time you're watching this video, there will have been a hearing before Congress about Antifa violence. Fox News reports. Ted Cruz is aiming to highlight the role Antifa and like-minded groups are playing in riots across the country, convening a Senate hearing Tuesday on the issue while alleging that radical left-wing groups are engaging in organized terror attacks designed to tear down government institutions. He says, across the country, we're seeing horrific violence. We're seeing our country torn apart. Violent anarchists and Marxists are exploiting protests to transform them into riots and direct assaults on the lives and safety of their fellow Americans, Cruz told Fox News in an interview. On Tuesday, Cruz will chair a hearing of the Judiciary Committee Subcommittee on the Constitution to investigate groups such as Antifa, which, while active for years, have recently escalated their presence in the wake of George Floyd's death in police custody. The hearing is called The Right of the People Peaceably to Assemble, Protecting Speech by Stopping Anarchist Violence. Okay, I got to stop you right there, Mr. Cruz. Anarchist is the wrong word. They're authoritarian communist for the most part. Some claim to be anarchists, but you can't be anarchist while simultaneously beating innocent random people in the street, okay? And it's happened. This is not anarchy. While some of them are anarchists for the most part, Antifa's affiliation is authoritarian communism. That's just the way it is, okay? Fine. But call it what you want. It is organized and it is terror. I'm going to introduce you now. I'm going to do something I haven't done before. And there's a reason for it. Because I don't like giving promotion to specific groups who will then try and use it to their benefit. But hey, you know what? So be it. I want to introduce you to a group called Rose City Antifa. It is a specific closed group with organizers, with leaders, with somehow funding, probably through themselves. They engage in violent activities. We have seen their photos plastered all over the place in Portland. They have been arrested. And I just want to point you to two important things they say on their own website. First, if you go to their website, they say, Rose City Antifa was founded in Portland, Oregon in October 2007. RCA was formed after a coalition of local people and organizations formed the Ad Hoc Coalition Against Racism and Fascism in order to shut down, skinheads, blah, blah, blah. The point is, it was founded. Founded by who? It requires a group of individuals to do the founding, does it not? So we can point out, they say that the group literally exists. The group was founded. Okay, there is a group. It's not. They say there's, but Antifa is not really a group. No. Stop. Just stop. Okay, accept it. This is one of the named groups, and they literally say on their website where they have an FAQ where people can ask to get involved. They say, "We appreciate and value our community, and couldn't do this without your support. You can send us tips if you see anything, share our social media posts and articles, attend events and rallies, and participate in call-in campaigns. We are a closed group to members only." To members only. Rose City Antifa is closed to members only. The reason I'm saying that so many times is that when they say, there's no membership of Antifa, how do I join? Well, you ask them. You hang out with Rose City, you buy their merchandise, you talk to the founders, and maybe it's closed to members and you can become one. They say, if you are interested in joining, please send us an email with a little bit of information about you and what makes you interested in joining. There you go. You want to join, you just got to send them an email. So when we see more and more fake news saying there is no such group, listen, there's one. And there's more than just one. What they do is they have different cells. They fly the same flag. They have the same ideology for the most part. And they work with each other when there are certain events going on to bolster their numbers. And they respect a diversity of tactics, they call it, which means they get violent. That's what they do. Andy points out, just the other night, Antifa rioters blockade street near the Southeast Portland police building. They steal benches from a nearby restaurant to use as barricades. They end up trashing the street and leaving that there for others to clean like last time. And here you can see they've got a line of picnic tables. And now we have the story from the Oregon Live. Northeast Portland protests declared unlawful assembly during 68th night of demonstrations Monday. How do you have 68 nights of demonstrations? Who's bailing these people out? Where do they get shields? Where do they get explosives? Where do they get literally anything? And is Rose City Antifa involved? Well, based on some of the previous reports, it would appear so. Some of these people associated with Rose City are on camera talking about what they do and why they do it. And someone gets them out of jail. Somebody bails them out. To be fair, seems like Portland is completely unable to stop these extremists attacking their own town. So if you live there and you have a problem with this, you should have moved out a long time ago. So I'm not going to sympathize. But it got pretty crazy and wild last night. I'll tell you what. Check out this story. Portland man charged with assaulting deputy U.S. Marshal with explosive device during courthouse protest. Let's talk about terrorism. In Portland, a man was arrested a couple days ago for throwing an explosive at the building. Apparently now this guy threw it at a person, and he's being charged by the DOJ from justice.gov. U.S. Attorney Billy J. Williams announced today that Isaiah Jason Maza Jr. of Portland has been charged by criminal complaint with assaulting a federal officer with a dangerous weapon and willfully damaging government property during protests at the Mark O. Hatfield U.S. Courthouse on July 22nd. Keeping that in mind, I want to point this out. They say a crowd of about 150 people marched to a Northeast Portland sheriff's office and rallied before being pushed back by Portland police, mirroring a similar confrontation that unfolded on Saturday. Another crowd of more than 100 gathered near the downtown Portland Justice Center, an event that also briefly turned tense as police appeared to make arrests. They say there were two different groups protesting. Now, many people are trying to make the claim that the violence has stopped, and there's viral tweets because these people don't do any research. It is so annoying. They're like, hey, look, now there's no violence because the feds are gone. The feds are still there. They're inside the building the same as they've always been. The state sent state police forces to protect the building, and then the big riots split off and started going after Portland police because the feds aren't coming out anymore. You see how this works? Let me break it down for you. The first night, they said everything was calm at the courthouse. They ignored the fact that 100 miles south of Portland, people were marching through residential neighborhoods fighting with police. The next day, we saw Portland protesters go to residential neighborhoods in the southeast of Portland. I believe Sunday was relatively calm, but it's not stopping. We're still seeing. Last night, they go to a police station and they fight with the Portland police. The Portland police have been, bashing people, arresting people. Where's all of the media to claim that Mayor Ted Wheeler is sending out a secret police force, his Gestapo? Yeah, nowhere to be found because the narrative is completely fake. Well, just the other day, as they claim everything was peaceful, without the police, we see arrests being made and apparently somebody got stabbed. They say, is this the right story I have here? Arrests during mass gathering at Kelly Building. No, I believe it's, here we go. From Oregon Live, woman wounded in downtown Portland stabbing. I'm just going to leave it there. That's the point. It was an Antifa woman who got stabbed. Someone showed up, was arguing with them, apparently turned around to leave, but then came back and stabbed one of the Antifa ladies. This is what happens when there's no police out in control of the situation, and it's just total chaos. So I'm not, I'm not blaming the Antifa woman necessarily because she's the one who got stabbed. You have to understand that if you're going to be if you're joining the fray with violent clashes, and we saw a conservative get stabbed, I'm not surprised that Antifa now got stabbed. But you know what? I believe they arrested this woman, and good, they should. I think they mentioned that she ended up getting arrested. They mentioned this. According to Portland police, officers initially found the knife that the suspect had used, but while police were securing the crime scene, someone picked the knife up and ran away with it. Police said they encountered a hostile crowd while trying to investigate and decided to leave the scene. That's the point I'm making here. We can talk about the things they've engaged in, and we can also talk about how they generally just create an unsafe environment. 100% responsibility for the stabbing falls on the person who did the stabbing, not the Antifa woman who got stabbed. But I will say responsibility lies on them for the fact that the police are now going to be unable to stop the person who did this, and then they ultimately had to leave because of the hostile crowd. So yes, it's still riots, there's still violence, and Antifa is still engaging in this behavior. Whether or not you want to call what these, unaffiliated idiots who are getting arrested and who are attacking cops, if you want to call them terrorists, that's going to be an opinion, I suppose. I would say they're absolutely engaging in acts of terror by trying to threaten people into adhering to their demands. But is it really Antifa at this point, or is it Black Lives Matter? Let's be honest. In photos now going around, they're flying the flag of Black Lives Matter. But I think when we say Antifa, we're referring specifically to, it's a colloquial word used to describe these far left extremists. At any rate, if the DOJ is going after them as terrorists, or their acts, I should say, the acts they engage in as acts of terrorism, well, then good. Like I said in the beginning, I'm not a big fan of someone, I'm not a big fan of taking, things that are already illegal and saying, but because of this, it's more illegal. It's like the crime was already illegal. Arrest them for it and lock them up. We can simplify it that way. I do, however, think we need to consider the fact that many of these people are learning how to do what they do from international sources. And that's going to be very serious. It's not just, in Syria. There's also people in Europe who are receiving training, who have friends, who communicate. These things are going to play a role in how we move forward with protest movements. The far left will be better able to disrupt our systems in ways that draws little attention to them. So keep that in mind. Is Antifa a terrorist organization? I would say no on the basis of the broad term Antifa, not an organization. Is Rose City and other branded named cells, are they terrorist organizations? Well, it's up to the U.S. to decide, but they certainly do engage in terrorism, period. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 6 p.m. over at youtube.com/TimCastNews, and I will see you all then.